Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're digging into a YouTube video from Louisa McMonigal that puts forward a really bold and frankly provocative claim that when it comes to Australian politics, voters are essentially being sold a false choice. So, let's get into the argument.
Right off the bat, the source sets the stakes incredibly high with this quote. The argument here isn't just about another election cycle, it's framed as a critical do-or-die moment for the entire country. Okay, so to build this case, the video points to what it calls a really volatile and shifting political landscape. And it uses some recent polling data to suggest there's a pretty big change happening in how people are thinking about their votes. And here's the data the source uses to back that up. It highlights a Sky News poll. And what's interesting here is that it shows support for Labour and One Nation as neck and neck, both at 27%. Meanwhile, the coalition's numbers are described as just stagnant. So the takeaway being presented is that the old-school political map is breaking up, and that's opening the door for other options. So building on that idea of a fractured landscape, the source then starts to systematically critique what it lumps together as the Uni-Party. That's both Labour and the Liberal National Coalition. The video argues that Labour's main housing policy, this 5% deposit scheme, was basically watered down by opening it up to permanent residents. Then, flipping over to the Liberals, it claims there's this deep distrust, accusing them of just signaling to their right-leaning base on things like the ASIO bill, but without ever taking any real concrete action. Now, a huge chunk of the video is dedicated to a really detailed critique of the Greens platform. The source's argument is that, yeah, it might be popular with younger voters, but when you actually look at the numbers, the policies are illogical and just completely impractical. So the first major point of attack is the Greens housing policy, which the video pretty much labels as a fantasy. Let's look at how they break that argument down. The source starts with the official numbers from the Greens plan, and it begins with the big goal to build over 610,000 new homes in 10 years. And then it points to the budget they've allocated for this massive project, $28 billion. But here is the absolute core of the critique. The video claims that the actual cost, if you look at build prices, would be way, way higher, closer to $300 billion. They present this huge financial black hole as proof that the plan just isn't grounded in reality. All right, next up, the source takes a hard look at the Greens' climate policy, highlighting what it calls extremely aggressive targets. We're talking net zero by 2035 and a complete switch to 100% renewables by 2030. So the counter-argument presented here is a big one. The source says, look, if you cut domestic production while the rest of the world still needs these resources, you're not just going to cripple a multi-billion-dollar export industry, you're going to create a fuel crisis at home, and that'll just force Australia to depend on other countries for its energy. The critique then moves into national security. The source video breaks down the Greens' defense proposals, which, as you can see, include canceling the AUKUS submarines and making annual cuts to defense spending. I mean, that is some incredibly strong language. The point the source is making with a quote like that is that these policies aren't just budget trims. They're arguing it's a fundamental weakening of Australia's strategic position that would compromise national security at a really critical time. So after trying to systematically dismantle the arguments of the major parties and the Greens, the video makes its big pivot. It presents what it claims is the only alternative that actually puts Australia's interests first. And there it is. This is really the central claim the entire video has been building towards. It positions One Nation as the one and only political party that's truly dedicated to national sovereignty and the interests of the Australian people. And here's the solution as presented in the video. You can see the platform outlined here is designed to be a direct answer to all the problems raised earlier. The policies are focused on things like ending mass immigration, firing up nuclear energy, and completely scrapping net zero targets. Now, this is a really crucial point the video makes. It's a direct warning to voters. The source argues that if you start hearing the major parties using similar language, it's not a genuine shift in their thinking. The video calls it a manipulation tactic, just to win back votes. The video doesn't just wrap up with a simple summary. Instead, it ends with a series of really stark warnings about what it sees as the consequences of either doing nothing or choosing the wrong path for the country. And here, the source points to the United Kingdom as a kind of cautionary tale. It brings up the UK's immigration rates, its strained infrastructure, and its homelessness crisis, and basically presents it as a preview of what Australia's future could look like if a big change isn't made. To try and make the stakes feel a bit more personal and immediate, the source highlights this statistic: 14 known cases of child marriage just in New South Wales. It then uses that data point to frame the issue as a direct failure of the government to protect its most vulnerable people. The video then tries to illustrate its argument about misplaced government priorities by making this pretty powerful comparison. On one hand, you have a charity that flies sick kids for treatment facing a funding shortfall, and on the other, a reported $20 million government ad campaign about roof rocks. And that's how the source leaves its audience, with this one final provocative question. It's a direct challenge to the platforms it has spent the whole time critiquing, and it really urges viewers to stop and seriously consider which path, if any, is actually going to benefit the nation.